Good evening, guys. Welcome back once again to another episode of Eddie G's Comic Culture. I'm your host, Eddie G, and once again, the show is brought to you by the good folks and family over at Black Apparel. Sending a special shout out to a friend and brother of mine, Kevin Seawright. Um, Making sure that you guys know that they've got some awesome content on their webpage at www.blackapparelblk.com. They also have some excellent merchandise. So in case you guys are ever looking for some gear, make sure you check them out soon enough whenever you have the chance. And also sending a special shout out to a good friend, one of my Instagrammers, of course, the Strictly Comedy Vault. He's a great young man, a young up and coming writer. He's got some awesome content on his page. So in case you guys have an Instagram account, make sure you check him out as well. And also to Blu-ray Dan, who is a big inspiration on what I'm doing now. He also has an Instagram page that he keeps constantly refreshed with new photos regarding Blu-rays and Ultra 4K Blu-rays that he receives and picks up himself, both for movies old and new, as well as a YouTube channel with some very insightful reviews. So make sure you check him out. And also sending a special shout out to a good friend of mine in New York City, Dennis Knight. He's a writer of Cross on Pronto Comics. He's actually going to be having a booth over at in the New York Comic Con at the Javits Center within the next 2 weeks or so. I have his information for the booth number. I just don't have it with me offhand. I do apologize, but in the future episodes, I will be keeping you guys posted with that. So keep your ears open. And today's episode, I want to conclude into the celebration of my brother's birthday with his favorite comic book feature. I know I did one yesterday for the 1989 Batman tribute. Um, I'm sorry it took me a while to get this one back up. I've just been very slow today. It's been those days are usually hard for me to get through. So I had quite a bit of a hangover. I had some wine yesterday, quite a bit of wine, honestly. So bear with me for that. But I wanted to dive into the sequel, Batman Returns, directed by Tim Burton, of course, and music composed by Danny Elfman, the legendary Danny Elfman. And this film was released in about the summer of 1992. This one I didn't get to go see it in the theaters for some reason. I was actually we were on a family vacation at the time in Puerto Rico, but I didn't manage to get a chance to see the movie then. And oddly enough, my younger sister ended up seeing Lethal Weapon 3 in theaters at that time, not Batman Returns, but that's neither here nor there. But the basic point is I never got to see that one in theaters as well. So hopefully, if the theater around me actually does, because they do have these flashback cinemas on Sundays and Wednesdays. Hopefully, that if they ever do have a chance to decide, if they ever decide to show it on any of the, if they ever decide to play it, I will be, front and center to see it. So with that being said, I want to dive into this feature, and this is a very this is where this movie was pretty symbolic in a lot of ways. It reintroduced us into the world of it reintroduced the world to Catwoman again, played by Michelle Pfeiffer, and it also reintroduced everyone to the Penguin, played by Danny DeVito, and apparently Michelle Pfeiffer literally. Funny enough, she wasn't actually supposed to be she wasn't really the first choice to play this role. Um, it was actually supposed to be Annette Bening, and apparently she was pregnant at the time. So once filming commenced, by the time that she got pregnant, filming was just about to start, and they ended up having to recast, and they went towards Michelle Pfeiffer. But even then, there's a lot of strange story. There's a stranger story behind that as well. Prior to when I believe the movie was in principal photography, if I'm not mistaken, it was definitely noted that Sean Young, as you guys may know her from what's that? She was in Ace Ventura: Pet Detective. I'm trying to think of something much more recent than Blade Runner. She was Rachel in Blade Runner though, and she was actually auditioning for the part in a way that it was very awkward, very strange. Well, eventually, if you guys don't know, she was actually scheduled to play Vicky Vale in the first Batman film, but something happened that she went horseback riding and had endured an accident where she ended up breaking her arm, and she couldn't. By that time, she had the worst luck with this franchise, honestly speaking. Sean Young had like the worst luck with this franchise because the first time around she was actually cast to play Vicky Vale, and due to that horseback riding accident where she fell and broke her arm, she wasn't able to play the part, so they ended up having to cast it to Kim Basinger. Then finally, after Batman Returns is set to play, she actually does something very awkward, very weird, and strange. She shows up on a set in front of Tim Burton and Michael Keaton in a homemade Halloween Catwoman costume, and attempts to sway them to signing her on for the role. But at that time, Michelle Pfeiffer had already been cast, and she was already trained for the role as well, physically, so to speak. So obviously, she was turned down again, and it led to Michelle Pfeiffer getting this role of getting the role of acquiring the role of Selena Kyle and Catwoman as well. As we all know, Christopher Walken. If you haven't, he's he's actually the main villain of the film. Honestly, apart from the Penguin and Catwoman, but he's actually the main villain of the film, Max Schreck, and he plays a corporate tycoon who's got some dirty, underhanded ways about his form of business, and in the beginning of the film, we actually see him having a business meeting with Bruce Wayne. Bruce Wayne, who's actually quite skeptical of Mr. Shrek's dealings, is very reluctant into entering any business negotiations with this Mr. Shrek. So as it starts off, it's like the movie supposedly takes place at the early days in Gotham, in Gotham City during the Christmas season. It's just about to hit Christmas, and it's apparently the set design is still amazing. Honestly, whoever was the art director in both Batman and Batman Returns, they should have gotten if they haven't received an Oscar nomination, they should have gotten one, definitely, at least a win for it, because their set design was absolutely phenomenal, stunning to say the least. It has this Art Deco style of feel to it, mixed with like classic 1930s, 1940s design as well, but just more run down and really gritty to say the least. But it was absolutely breathtaking to see that, and that was one of the main things that drew upon this. It really built the atmosphere for Batman in Gotham City, and in the beginning of the film, there's a tree lighting ceremony, and that tree lighting ceremony is violently interrupted by the Red Circus Triangle Gang. The Red Circus Triangle Gang just so happens to be the very gang that's controlled by the Penguin. And at the beginning of the film, before any of that occurs, we see the origins of Penguin, and exactly, he's not the gangster. He's not the tough gangster that that we've known in the comic books. Tim Burton is actually responsible for altering that and made him somewhat of a mutant creature. You see him being born, in the beginning, there's a screenshot of a mansion, and he's actually being born at home by and his father, who's actually being played by Paul Rubens, aka Pee Wee Herman. If you guys ever see that movie and haven't noticed, or if you see the movie and notice that his father looks quite familiar, it's because of that. But it was awesome, to say the least, that they put a little twist on it. That was a little, it worked though. It worked for what it's worth, because it's a Tim Burton feature as well. I'm not going to take away that, and I love his style. So, but it definitely worked for me and my taste. It didn't bother me so much. But it was just strangely enough not to see him in full on gangster mode as he usually is portrayed. So he's actually kind of a mutated, at birth individual, and his parents desert him. They abandon him. They toss his carriage into the sewers, and he spends quite a good time trying to figure out exactly. The film, it has a personal edge for him, because he's trying to find out exactly what happened with his parents, who his real parents were, and why they were why they shunned them from society, why they shunned him from the family to begin with. And so it was pretty difficult. It was pretty touching, to say the least. That it was a poignant series. It was a poignant part of the film, honestly, because here he is. He's just he's just a victim of circumstance, and he really just felt the need to get revenge. He was quite He's quite randy throughout the movie, honestly. As he rose to prominence, Danny DeVito played him so great. But he was quite randy throughout the movie because he's always making a move on chicks, and in particularly so he does so on Catwoman. Sorry to all my female fans. I don't mean to refer to women as chicks, but you know it is. It's one of those bad habits I'm trying to break. But in all honesty, yeah, yeah, they tried to give him they gave him somewhat of a comedic edge to say the least, and it worked to a degree. It worked to a degree. Sometimes it was just downright creepy though, and that's where it kind of like teetered along dangerous at paths, you know. So, with that being said, as him and Catwoman actually meet up, they try to form an alliance, but Catwoman doesn't, Catwoman only wants to try to destroy Batman with help, whereas the Penguin is just, he's just interested in getting with her. And at that time, he already rose to prominence, as I said before in the film, as his character grows. Through the help of this Max Shrek, he's actually grown to being liked by the citizens of Gotham City, so much so to the point where he decides to run for mayor, and uses the plot twist of how Gotham City's crime is actually plaguing them. So in that, you see Bruce Wayne trying to figure out how to figure out to crack this the scheme of things that's going on between these two individuals, as he has Catwoman, who's also emerged from the scene as she was literally pushed out of the window of the top floor of an office skyscraper by her boss Max Shrek, which is why I say he was the main villain in this film. He's actually manipulative in quite a bit of ways. And Christopher Walken he was great. Honestly, that character was excellently cast because he really did play that role of a creepy villain to the T, and it was unbelievable, man, it really was. But a lot of the time it was just, it really more or less circulated around, like I loved how the film actually circulated between the two characters, Penguin and Catwoman, as to what what their story was, what their motivations were for being who they are, and it really showcased very well exactly how they were both being used to be involved in the life that they were in. They were both very big, they were both victims of circumstance. Whereas opposed to the original, the first Batman movie, we all know that Joker ended up being he was a gangster in the beginning by being played by Jack Napier, which was another twist that Tim Burton did in the movie. And also he was the one that was responsible for the murder of Bruce Wayne's parents. Whereas the later iterations or the early iterations of the comic books actually just know that his parents were murdered by just a regular thug, a random thug, Joe Chill, actually. So Tim Burton's twist on these stories was actually pretty significant because it did a good change to that. It actually put a good change of pace to it, and it put more of a motive for Batman in the beginning. So watching this film, my brother was really enamored with especially how Michelle Pfeiffer really owned the role of Catwoman, who was already portrayed in the earlier '60s series from Adam West and Burt Ward, with Eartha Kitt, Julie Newmar. I know I'm forgetting the other two actresses, so forgive me please for that. But those are the ones that the ones that are at the forefront is Julie Newmar and Eartha Kitt, and there hasn't been there wasn't any recent iteration of her on screen after that. So to see that was awesome, to say the least. And she really owned the role. Michelle Pfeiffer was the shining light in Batman Returns. She really conquered being the Catwoman. Like, no, I don't think anyone has done a better job, honestly. Like, she was, like, a lot of people really debate who was the best Catwoman, and to this day, even with Anne Hathaway and The Dark Knight Rises, she was okay. She was pretty good, but nothing could still, she didn't have the pizzazz that she just didn't have that aura about her. Michelle Pfeiffer really brought something to the table. She really brought something that she owned onto that role. Like, she made it her own, and she did it in such a way that was just unbelievable. It was pivotal of all things because it really marked a lot of, it really made a mark for her in her career. But it was definitely a wonderful feature film, and as it climaxes with the final battle at the abandoned Arctic in the abandoned Arctic exhibit at the zoo, in the Gotham City Zoo, and of course Penguin is using his, after being ousted from Batman himself, very and humiliate in a very humiliating form, in a very humiliating fashion, so to speak. He vows revenge against all the citizens in Gotham City as well as Batman, and it turns out pretty bad for him, you know. And finally, the end result was really more so Catwoman versus Maxwell Shrek. While, whereas at that scene, the final scene, Batman really just played like he was just a supporting character, so to speak, in the movie, and it really did show in that matter because as he was really just trying to, as Selina Kyle was about to murder Max Shrek, she killed him anyway, and you see Bruce, they both have their masks off at that point. Catwoman and Batman they've already exposed themselves to each other. They knew who they are, they knew who they really were after battling, so on and so forth. So with that being said, Catwoman went ahead and as Bruce is pleading with her not to do it, not to murder him, not to kill him. Um, she does gaze off, like the way she gazes, and this is one of the main things that made it even so much more awesome to watch Michelle Pfeiffer. The way she would just gaze off into the distance and talking, because you could see that she was already a damaged and affected individual as to what had happened originally with her, and she really wanted to have the normal life, but unfortunately she couldn't have it because of because of the extensive damage psychologically that she endured through this person, and in all good conscience she just couldn't let him walk. And so it closes out with her disappearing, and the Penguin already battered from wounds earlier, and taking his last dying breath to try to and swearing to kill Batman, but unfortunately he couldn't make it after he chooses to he's about to get himself a cold drink of water, and you see the ink that's coming out of his mouth. You could tell the way he's gasping for air that these are his last moments, which was a sad take as well. It was a very sad moment to see him go because like I said before, these characters were both victims of circumstance. They didn't choose a life of crime. The life of crime kind of chose them for what they were because they were shunned by society. They were left out of they were left out of everyone's life. Like they didn't really have much to grasp onto. They were just loners, and it really was a very difficult. It was a very, in a sense, it was a very heartbreaking thing to witness when it comes down to it, because when you see these characters at their most vulnerable in the very beginning, it explains exactly where they go. Now, obviously, the ending scene supposedly was another shot. Was supposedly a shot of Catwoman staring at the bat signal, which it was, but that wasn't even Michelle Pfeiffer who was playing the role. Obviously, in that scene, as I found out later, they actually Michelle, I think, was either working on another movie at that point, and they had to get another stand-in actress to play that. But it wasn't a big deal. It was just a minor shot. It was just Catwoman staring at the bat signal towards the end of the film. But the long lasting. Well, first of all, let's talk about the way this film was actually brought out. At the middle of that, it really was the height of the Batman animated series. It came out, it coincided with it, and it just totally went bananas with it. Everything was just, it was like a hand in hand marriage. It was perfect. The video games that came along with it. At that point, the Sega Genesis and Sega CD, as well as Super Nintendo, were already out in full force. The 16-bit era had taken flight. So at that point, it was pretty much a movie to port video game, but it was one of the best movie to port video games I've ever seen in my entire life. I think that's actually personally, I find it to be the best movie port video game, because both the Super Nintendo and Sega CD's versions were absolutely incredible. That was the only good thing about Sega CD, honestly, aside from the Sonic CD, was Batman Returns. Everything else was completely useless. But for Super Nintendo, for the Batman Returns game for Super Nintendo was absolutely stunning. It was incredible. It was visceral. The visuals were just stunning. The soundtrack was incredible. You know, it was a side-scrolling beat 'em up, but it was done so perfectly well. It was unbelievable, and it was it was just a breathtaking video game. And then to top off, it was the second wave of the Batman figures, of course, the Batman Returns figures from, I believe, Kenner was in charge. Kenner was a big was a big toy maker back in the day, and they really took off with that as well. Absolutely, and they started really mentioning they started that was the I believe that was the birth of all of those Batman figures, with the seven with all these different designs and so on and so forth. These ridiculous designs that you would never see in the movie or in the comic books in the first place. It was just doing they just made them just for the simple fact of selling toys, honestly. But for the big, you know, for what it was worth, it had a very big impact on the video game and the toying industry. However, here comes a negative. Apparently, parents were actually quite upset at the dark tone of this film. It was a lot darker than the first one, honestly. It didn't. A lot of a lot of the themes in the movie they really weren't too keen on having their children watch, especially the sexual themes with Catwoman as well, and as well as you know, the hypersexed Penguin who when he was Oswald Cobblepot. A lot of parents didn't take too keen about that. They weren't too flattered with it, and McDonald's actually almost ended up pulling some of the Happy Meal toys. If I think or I think they did actually, from circulation because of the way the parents were complaining about the film, and it really just, you know, it really was marketed, but it was the thing is that it was marketed as a children's film, but it really wasn't. And for that reason alone, a lot of people were pissed off. I don't know if that might have been the start or birth of 1 Million Moms, or they probably were around at that time, anyways, already established. But there was quite a few angry parents that had their concerns to voice over the movie, and how they didn't how they felt that it was just too inappropriate in a lot of ways for for children, for young children, in particularly. And it kind of led to this major cluster because Warner Brothers decided to go on with a lighter tone with Batman Forever, and with that, it literally you could tell the suffering in quality from literally it was just night and day. Tim Burton left the project for Batman Forever, as well as Michael Keaton. Michael Keaton, who flat out said that he read the script and just said that it sucked, even though he was being paid quite a bit of money for what it was worth at the time. He was being paid 15 million for to reprise the role again, but he just said no. He said no, not at all. And so, with that being said, after Batman's Return, after the reception of Batman Returns from all these from families across the country, it led to the downfall of these films being made, such as Batman Forever and Batman and Robin. However, both were money makers, but they were still critical bombs. Nobody liked the films at all, and with good reason. Deservedly so. It earned the disdain that it received. But to say the least, the Batman Returns will always have a place in history for what it's worth because of what it brought to the table. It reinvented the character of Catwoman on screen, and it made it so that now, even in the comic books, even in continuity and canon right now, Catwoman is very much so like much like the film version of the film counterpart. And the only thing that just that didn't translate that well because of that character didn't translate from the film to comic book pages. Obviously, of course, was Penguin, because that wasn't Penguin at all. They kind of and a lot of people and some fans were angered at that concept as well too. A lot of them didn't like the fact. A lot of fans didn't like the fact that Tim Burton took the liberty of changing the Penguin origin of that, in that nature. So it was kind of upsetting, but nonetheless, it was one of my brother's favorite Batman film of all time, and I understand exactly why. I always preferred 1989 with Jack Nicholson and Michael Keaton. Of course, my Jack Nicholson's Joker was brilliant at the time, and it still is brilliant, regardless of the fact some people may even consider, some younger cats might even consider his Joker a little hokey and campy, but it's not. It really isn't, honestly. So my preference was always 1989 Batman. His always was Batman Returns, and simply because of the, and I understand because of the draw of Catwoman and how she was, how well she was portrayed on screen, and Michelle Pfeiffer delivered a really pivotal performance. That her performance was 5 stars, man. I'm sorry, and it's true. She earned it. She stamped it. She owned that role, and to this day, she's still looked upon as that as the iconic Catwoman, regardless of whatever. Not that Halle Berry was bad. I mean, I just know she had a really bad movie, tremendously stupid movie, if I may say so myself. But I don't think anyone could ever take that role away from Michelle Pfeiffer alone. She really put the oomph in that, and she stamped her name on that. So I can't ever see anyone like knocking her down. She's like the Christopher Reeve of that role, honestly. She really is that iconic at this point, and that was just a major draw for my brother. Of course, there was no Prince returning for the soundtrack, which was a downer for him, but on the plus side, he managed to see that, and it was great enough that he was actually able to. We debated so much exactly why, the intricacies of the differences of both films, but it was awesome to see that. Nonetheless, and it's difficult now to reminisce because it gets a little difficult to not get choked up, but it's one of those moments where I do wish we could have our conversations again regarding our love for these films and comic books, and what made them so apparently different from what it was beforehand. Because when you're fans of these things, when you're a fan, you witness the evolution of these stories, you witness the evolution of these characters. It's something else. It really you really get invested emotionally, and you get taken aback at how a lot of this happens. So it really is something else. But definitely one of the top comic book films of all time is Batman Returns. Um, it did suffer unfortunately from the Superman syndrome, because both Keaton and Christopher Reeve had some great starts to their franchises, but horrible finishes, to be honest, if I may say so myself. I mean, it's just it sucks that that was the turnout for it all, but you know what can you do? At least Keaton managed to bow out before it got really bad, though. So I give him that. So with that being said, guys, I'm gonna close this episode up once again with thanking you for the love and support that you've been showing. I definitely appreciate it. Thank you to all of those who've been watching the show since the very beginning. Um, in conclusion, I'm wrapping up my brother's birthday tribute with this one. And once again, as I always state, if you have any questions, suggestions, or comments, you already know what to do. Hit the comment section. I'll be looking and checking out to see what you guys want to do or discuss upon in future episodes. I'll definitely put into consideration and write that baby in there for us to discuss about as time goes on. But once again, thank you guys for riding out with me. I love you. You guys are great, and I'll see you guys next time. Stay safe. Bye bye.